Hello, good evening, and welcome. This is an unusual one. I'm going to flip my camera on for a second, and you'll see that I am in the dark. The lights went out in Africa about 10 minutes before this was due to start, so I've rushed around, got all my solar panel gear working, got the batteries connected up, and the only upside for me is it means I'm definitely the only person in the village with internet at the moment, so it's going to go rip-roaringly for me. So that's very cool. Joined this evening by Bruce in New Zealand and Craig in the UK. Good morning to you, Bruce, on Wednesday, and good evening to you, Craig.
Good evening.
G'day. G'day. So let's jump straight in with Craig Lippett. Craig, you're from ARPAS. What is ARPAS, and what are you up to at the moment?
Okay, thanks, Gary. I'm Craig Lippett. I'm the chairman of the Association of Remotely Piloted Aircraft Systems in the UK, and we're a trade association representing remote pilot professionals, but also manufacturers and other professionals in the industry. And we've been established now about 3 years. We have about 480 members. We're expanding at a rate of about 10 members a week. And we are positioning ourselves, in fact, we're very well established now, I think, as the voice of the industry in the UK, recognised by UK Government, Department for Transport and the Civil Aviation Authority. And we have representatives operating in a range of stakeholder working groups throughout the industry, both in the UK and by invite within Europe. And so our influence is sort of growing. We're now sort of moving at a geopolitical level, so we're starting now to influence at parliamentary and the House of Lords and government level. So lots of progress made in the last 3 years. Essentially, we started out with 7 or 8 people, literally in a British pub with an idea and no real clue about how we were going to make it happen. In the 3 years since that point, we have an established committee. We're about to roll out a proper magazine with high graphic content, proper articles. We have numerous working groups working on a range of issues within the industry, such as regulation, compliance, safety management, risk management, and training, and focusing on a number of areas, things like emergency services, and security and logistics, drone delivery, that sort of thing. So exciting times for ARPAS, and we're looking really to expand and sort of increase our influence, and particularly our networking, not just through Europe, but globally as well. We're in a global world, and so we're very keen to expand our network.
Now, you've been quite heavily involved, and the reason I want to speak to you is about all these proposed changes in European legislation. Last week or the week before, we saw Sweden saying, oh, no to camera drones, and we're hearing all sorts of rumblings and bad news out of Europe. What is the current state of play, firstly as regards the UK, and then secondly as regards to folks in mainland Europe, if I can say that?
Okay, well, the situation in the UK at the moment has very recently become kind of stable. We, as a country, the Civil Aviation Authority approaches UAV regulation with what's called a light touch. So I think we've struck a reasonable balance between over-regulation and no regulation at all, and that has allowed the industry in the UK to expand. We're now currently at about 2,300 registered operators, and only about 3 or 4 years ago we were only at about 180. So you can see the growth curve there, which has been quite encouraging for the industry, and lots of people coming into the sector at the moment from all parts of business and industry, looking to adopt UAV technology. So that's quite encouraging. In the summer of this year, the previous UK government, headed by David Cameron, had stated that they were going to release next year a parliamentary bill. So basically a law which said that within that law there would be, it's called the Modern Transport Bill, and there would be an unmanned aircraft related segment within that bill, which there was going to be some interim changes to regulations. Some of those regulations, which I learned mostly through conversation with the CEA, because it was very difficult to pin them down, to get them to actually state formally what those changes were going to be. I learned that some of them might have been a bit contentious, one of which I think was going to be although most people would call it deregulation, the CA were very keen to describe it as regulatory reform. But essentially, what they were looking to do was to reduce or eliminate the requirement for an operator to have a commercial operation if they were flying an aircraft below 4 kilograms. Now, given that the ARPAS membership was 480, there were 2,300 registered operators in the UK. That meant that there was a possibility of disenfranchising some of those people that had already gone through the training and assessment process. And so we felt that it was going to be a contentious issue and that there would be quite a lot of pushback during the consultation. And that consultation, as part of UK parliamentary law, could have gone through in the last 6 to 8 weeks. As it turned out, the change of government in the summer following the EU referendum result, which brought into power Prime Minister Theresa May and her new cabinet, changed the strategic shift of the government, and they started to take a more sort of a less active look at changing unmanned aircraft regulation in the UK. So where we are at the moment is that consultation didn't happen. Changes that were planned for the modern transport bill with regard to unmanned aircraft regulations are, as I understand it, not now going to happen. So where we are at the moment is there is no change in the UK until such time as the UK look to adopt the EASA prototype regulations that were published back in August for consultation and are currently having had quite a lot of feedback, I would imagine, from quite a number of member states, including members in the UK, and indeed myself, and a formal response from trade industry organisations, including ARPAS UK. EASA at the moment are considering those feedback points with a view to sort of moving on to the next level. Where I think we're going with the prototype regulations is that the current member states of EASA are all in the process of considering them. And I think as a sort of a summary point for that regulatory framework, essentially it's moving now towards a more risk-based framework rather than a regulating framework that is geared towards the size of the aircraft. So the EASA prototype regulations defines essentially 3 categories, which is open, specific, and certified. Certified being larger aircraft, unmanned aircraft equivalent to manned aircraft in terms of size and capability, with equivalent levels of airworthiness and design and production capability. So where it would apply for smaller aircraft, smaller unmanned aircraft, was in open and specific. And open was very much geared, we felt, because within the open category there were 4 subcategories that were geared towards the performance of the aircraft and the size. Some of those were very much geared towards the consumer industry, so less of a focus, I think, for commercial operators. Where the focus seemed to lie for commercial operators was in the specific category. So these were operators that currently have a commercial operating permission in the country in which they operate. They would then at some point transfer over to the new EASA regulations. There would hopefully be some form of seamless transition. And in effect, the changes weren't that great. They weren't going to have a great deal of impact on commercial operators. Now, it is fair to say that that isn't the case, we think, for the hobbyists, the radio control model fraternity. I think they were quite concerned with some of the wording and language that EASA was using within there, they felt that they were going to be rolled up within that regulation and in some way sort of marginalised or disenfranchised against what they're doing at the moment. And what you have to consider with the radio control model, for example, is that they're quite considerable. They've got a big lobby in the UK. The British Model Flying Association has about 37,000 members, long established. They've got good training networks. They've got good insurance frameworks in place. They operate safely in thousands of known and identified sites throughout the UK, and there is no reason why they shouldn't continue to do that. I think they were a bit concerned that the EASA regulations were just going to sweep them up within unmanned aircraft commercial regulations, and that they might in some way be disadvantaged. Now, I don't know, they will have had the opportunity to make feedback like everyone else on the prototype regulation consultation that came out, and the deadline for which passed in the middle of October. I've yet to see what the outcome of that feedback is, and what the salient points are of the feedback. So it remains to be seen at the moment with EASA what they're going to do. But as it stands at the moment, EASA are going to move forward. The prototype regulations are probably going to come into play, although they say within the next 18 months to 2 years. I think it may take a bit longer than that, because if you know anything about European parliamentary politics, it's a tough process. It's glacial in terms of its progress, and so I think it may take it slightly longer than that. So I think we might be looking at the implementation of the EASA prototype rules in some form, not necessarily in the form that they are at the moment, but in an amended form within the next 2 to 3 years. So given that timescale, I think they'll be implemented. It should be implemented just before 2020. So that's basically a potted history of EASA. And with regard to Sweden, it is an interesting point. I think it was if you look at the forums for commercial operators and FPV and hobbyists as well, we're concerned about the changes within Sweden. I think there was a lot of conjecture about what the Swedish regulations meant, and personally, I'm still not absolutely clear what they mean, because I've yet to see any proper regulatory documents. But I think what it does illustrate is that countries, not just within the EASA, the member states of the EASA, but countries around the world are starting to wake up quickly now to what unmanned aircraft, what drones represent to them, the risks that they present to the public, the privacy concerns, the safety concerns. And so governments, individual national governments, are starting to respond, and some of them are likely to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, which is overdo the response and worry about reining it in slightly later on, rather than come up with a proportionate response from the outset. And that is really only to be expected. You've got over 200 countries in the world. Some of them are very advanced in terms of drone regulations, and some have very little at all. There are some where you don't need an operating permission. In the underdeveloped world, for instance, there are a number of countries in Africa, there are a number of countries in South America where you can essentially go and arrange a permission just by speaking with a local authority and having a word with the police chief, with the local police chief. So, but all of that is changing, and almost every country now is starting to look at drone regulation, the implementation of drone regulation, and starting to take it more seriously, because it does represent a real challenge, a real issue now for these countries. Drones are becoming more readily accessible for people. You can buy them off the internet, and so I think they're going to have to address it. It isn't something that is going to go away. It's expanding exponentially in almost every country you can name, and the regulations are changing accordingly. So I think, from our perspective as an industry, we need to be prepared to to keep watch on countries like Sweden and some of the other countries that are developing their regulations at the moment, and try and provide a balanced response, a proportionate response from the industry to what these regulations are presenting, because sometimes they do go overboard. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide a balance between maintaining safety, which is absolutely critical. We understand that. We all understand that. Whilst at the same time allowing channels, allowing mechanisms for industry to get moving, to proliferate. So that's essentially it, Gary. That's my summary. Hopefully, I haven't spoken too much.
No, don't worry about it. I'm gently snoozing here. So, what is ARPAS's position as regards the model aircraft fraternity, and perhaps helping to fend off any unforeseen consequences of heavy regulation?
Well, we've got good, really good liaison channels with the British Model Companies Association, with the FPV Association, and and there's a good reason for that. Is because they've been going. We have to recognise they've been going a lot longer than the commercial UAV sector. They're well established, very well organised. They've got a really good groundswell of membership, a good membership base. They have established insurance and training frameworks. So we've actually got quite a lot to learn from them in terms of how they organise things. And from our perspective, personally, this is me speaking as a professional in the UAS industry, but also as chairman of ARPAS, what we wouldn't want is unmanned aircraft regulation to disadvantage what they are already doing, because it's already proven that they can operate safely. So my message, I think, to regulators across Europe and actually globally as well is to, you need to recognise what's already there and not disadvantage them. There is no need to be able to do that, because they do things differently. They don't operate in the same way. Radio control modelers, in most cases, they operate from identified protected sites where things are very organised, so you know where they are. Manned aircraft can avoid them. It's essentially segregated airspace. It's slightly different in the commercial UAV world for obvious reasons, in that we're required to go out to sites that in almost all cases aren't segregated. They're often, it could be anywhere, essentially. It could be in urban or rural settings. It could be in the middle of cities. It could be close to airfields, which obviously present a whole host of risks. And those sort of flying profiles are not normally the sort of thing that radio control models do. So we have, our view here is that, we have a vested interest as an aviation stakeholder, as the BMFA and other radio control model associations are, they're aviation stakeholders as well. So rather than moving towards a sort of an isolationist approach, we at ARPAS particularly are very keen to promote liaison, and we've got a lot of engagement going on with the British Airline Pilots Association, with the Guild of Air Traffic Control Officers, with the general aviation community in the UK generally, with the British Helicopter Association, with a whole host of other aviation stakeholders, because we've recognised that what we can't afford to do is, in our own little stovepipe, talking about how fabulous commercial UAV operations are, without taking into account the holistic aviation environment. It is important for us to understand that, and that means as well engaging with government at the highest level. It also means engaging with the military, because they have, they are stakeholders as well. They often operate in a lot of the environments that commercial UAV operators are operating within. So we have to be mindful of that. So it's very much a case of, open engagement with these organisations, so that we can align our thoughts, because otherwise it becomes counterproductive. We will end up briefing against each other, and then there'll be sort of suspicion and doubt about whether somebody's sort of following our strategies or not, and actually it becomes then counterproductive. So we recognise that the best approach here is to be open, is to be engaging with these organisations.
I think in Australia, where they've just recently, in the back end of September, relaxed sub 2 kilo rules quite dramatically, and that's a very cool thing. There is a pretty big pushback from established operators and the airline operators, so both from the unmanned world, the guys that have already got their licenses that they paid for there, and then from the manned world saying, "Oh, it's a bad thing." So it's interesting. There was there obviously hasn't been as much communication between the groups in Australia, which is a little bit disappointing, I guess. I don't know if you know much about the situation there.
Yeah, I can't comment about Australia directly, but I think there will be a different culture in each country. But essentially, the way I see it is we're all in some way, either directly or indirectly, in the aviation business. And everything that we do, whether we are flying airliners or whether we're flying commercial drones or whether we are just racing drones, in a forest somewhere, we're all in some way intrinsically linked. And really, the only way to make safety work is to have sort of an open engagement on this. The moment you start to point fingers and start to talk about and brief against other organisations, you start to engender distrust, and then before you know it, you're in a position where you have no channels of communication. You are very suspicious of what the other person's doing. So it's very much, I think, the onus is on all of us to keep an open mind and to maintain these channels of engagement. It might be, we all have to accept that whilst compromise is a good thing, we may not be able to compromise fully on everything. Some of our positions may not be the same, but we in ARPAS UK, we've recognised that we can still have engagement with other aviation stakeholders and have, say, 80 to 90% commonality on their views and agree to disagree on others, but still be able to work together. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us, whether we're in Australia, whether we're in the UK or in Europe or the States or elsewhere. I think it's important for us to keep that message.
Fair play. Bruce, have you got any thoughts on conversing with aviation authorities?
Yes, it's interesting. This whole thing is pivotal to the future of the industry and the hobby. And I found that it varies so much from country to country. Some countries have got some really good regulations and some really good regulatory authorities, but others are far from that. For example, as we've already mentioned here today, in Australia, EASA, the authority, has just passed basically changed their regulations to allow commercial use of drones under 2 kg without certification and all the other bits and pieces that go on there. But here in New Zealand, we have a completely different set of rules, and in the USA, different sets of rules. And there's no continuity between the rules, which makes it difficult for somebody to come up with sort of safety and education information that's going to transcend all the boundaries. I've made some notes, actually. The big thing that I've noticed is none of the regulators have actually defined what a drone is compared to, for example, a model aircraft. I mean, they're two totally different things. As far as most regulators are concerned, a drone is anything that flies, and that can be from a paper dart. Here in New Zealand, a paper airplane is considered to be a drone, and right up to the most sophisticated GPS-guided, waypoint-capable machine weighing many, many kilograms. So until they can define what a drone is, how can you pass regulations that are going to be fair and reasonable across all boundaries?
I think, aren't they moving towards anything that can be controlled without can sustain flight and be controlled in 3-axis without a pilot on board is sort of a lot of the ways around how people define it. Craig, you're a trainer of note. You should know exactly what the term is.
Well, I should do, but Bruce makes a good point. I've just written a positioning paper for a reasonably prominent organisation, and within there I had to put in a glossary where with the numerous terms for unmanned aircraft, including drone, unmanned aircraft system, unmanned aerial vehicle, remotely piloted aircraft system, remotely operated air vehicle, and just an endless list, because It doesn't seem to be a commonly accepted term. Although I have to say that drone seems to be the one that
Yeah.
seems to be taking hold, largely driven, I think, by media, and mainly because it trips off the tongue a great deal easier. And it also seems to be less now linked, or less synonymous, I think, with the military type idea of a drone flying overhead and dropping weapons on you. I think now it's started to become more and more linked to smaller manned aircraft that you see at these sort of tech events where, well, this drone can do this drone can now take selfies, or it follows you down a ski slope. So, but it does make the point, because Bruce makes a good point, because I mean, radio control modelers, they are very keen to make a distinction between what they do and what drones are becoming, because radio control modelers are essentially, they're in their business. I don't know, it's not a business, it's a hobby, but they're in their hobby because they enjoy flying. They enjoy the physical sensation of flying, the sheer pleasure of maneuvering an aircraft around. Whereas in a commercial sense, many of us have got into commercial UAV operation because we were hobbyists and because we enjoyed doing it as for leisure or for pleasure, and then realised that perhaps we could find a way to use those skills to monetize it and make it work for us as a business. But a lot of people coming into the industry now are not actually, don't give a great deal of thought to the physical aspect of flying. For them, an unmanned aircraft, a drone, whatever you want to call it, it's just simply a method of data capture, which of course is an important message in itself, because it isn't just about the drone, it's about the end product, it's about the outcomes that you provide to the client.
Yeah.
And I think, but so there seems to be less of a, people are still focusing very much on the unmanned aircraft and some of the the key components for making it all work, the safety elements, the privacy elements. But I think there's, I often say in my sort of training and assessment when I'm doing examinations with pilots, I always try and get across, I always try and emphasize the fact that what you're actually doing is that you're using an unmanned aircraft to put a camera in a three-dimensional space, time and space, in order to achieve an image end effect, which will eventually become a product. And it's really about those outcomes. So
there's that hammer in the toolbox, isn't it? Really, that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something. It's something like, I was in the military. I was in the UK military for 20 plus years. I was in the Air Force, and when we were operating overseas, we were having to learn these principles. At the end of the day, it's a platform. It has an effect, and whilst people are, they get all very excited about the idea of unmanned aircraft doing this and that, but broadly speaking, the real value for these platforms is what they can produce in terms of imagery, and what that imagery can then transform into an end product, whether it's a three-dimensional geographical or geospatial survey model, or whether it's an inspection report on a wind turbine blade, or any other number of products. At the end of the day, it's a tool, as you say, it's a tool in the toolbox. And I personally have found with larger commercial clients recently that, to be honest with you, when you when you go into a pitch, you can take your unmanned aircraft in, but in many cases they're enthusiastic for the first 45 seconds. But really, they're not bothered if you obtain the imagery using that, or whether you obtain it using the Hubble telescope. The point is that they want value at the end of the process, and they're not really bothered how you achieve it, as long as you can.
Yeah, I think once the sizzle of the opened bottle of champagne of the unmanned world starts to die down, people that rush into the business suddenly discover that they do have to present products to people at the end of the day, and it's a bit of a worry. It's not so cool. But that sort of links on nicely. What I wanted to speak about before the lights went out and I rushed around and haven't been able to get the slides up was, I don't know if anyone noticed that that Drone Deploy this last week came to the party with having groups of apps, and Precision Hawk already has that. So what that basically means is you take your imagery, and as long as you take your imagery to within a set of specifications for whatever it is, you then just buy the bolt-on. Instead of buying a load of software to have on your own computer, you buy the processing bit you want. And the one I'm interested in trying out, because it's harvesting or planting rather is just happening, is I want to try out the row counting for plants. And I can see a great pivot away from platforms and excitement about platforms to excitement about getting that actionable data. I've now ranted. I don't know. Have either of you noticed that?
Yeah, the whole future is about a solution. We're not talking about drones. We're not talking about software. We're talking about a solution that solves a problem. And I think you're right. Cloud-based computing solutions seem to be the way to go. I know a number of people here in New Zealand that are collecting data with their drones and then offloading it to a cloud-based system that produces is looking for, and that's the secret. The drone is just one part of the total solution, and people who go out there without an awareness of this are just going to fail in business.
Yeah, I think we said it last week. You know, you can have great ideas and write it on the back of your beer mat or your fag packet when you're down the pub, and you're going to make a fortune, and it only costs this, and look what I'm going to do. And then when it comes to actually producing a product, people don't have. And I think that the one that interests me the most is the ag market and how that's been oversold. And if you ever actually go out and talk, I think all three of us live in the countryside to an extent. And if someone from the city comes with a big idea about how he's going to make this farmer much more profitable, but with really no idea how the farmer operates, then they're in for a rude awakening. And I think a large amount of the hype. I also see the hype is dying away as well. I don't know. Perhaps is it still as hyped in the UK, Craig?
Yeah, a little. I think there's still a lot of people coming into the industry. I'm not absolutely convinced that they have sustainable business models, if I'm honest, because I've spoken with some of them, and I'm still getting statements such as, "Oh, well, you know, I think we'll be able to do some form of marketing video type work without a real network which underpins it." But to come back to Bruce's point about, you know, cloud systems producing a sort of a better output, I think that's where the successful businesses are going to be. And as an example, in the last month or so at the commercial UAV show recently, I happened to speak with a couple of contacts who are in a UK-based but globally, or a company that has a global reach but UK-based, a company called Sky Futures, and Sky Futures are relatively well known in the industry for having been around a while. They're ex-British military, but they seem to be adapting their strategy in accordance with what we have talked about, whereas they started out initially focusing very much on the idea of the drone, and in the last couple of months they started to release their own software-based products, and in particular there's one, it's an inspection-based product called software product called Hanger. And I saw a demo of it, and essentially they have developed it themselves. And what it's able to do is to give a three-dimensional, very high-resolution, three-dimensional picture of some of the infrastructure assets that they are currently inspecting. In particular, offshore oil installations. So rather than what people have been doing previously, which is obtaining the imagery using unmanned aircraft and then compiling a report using somebody who is trained as an engineer to look at an image and determine whether there's a problem with, say, a flare stack tip. what they've started to do now is they've started to use very clever software programs with algorithms built in, which builds a three-dimensional model and can model, what the sort of level of corrosion is at various points, and then determine with an algorithmic curve when maintenance is going to be required. And those sort of things just can't be achieved with the normal human brain. They are achieved largely with software solutions that are configured to deliver those. And that's where the future is currently going at the moment. So all the guys coming into the UK industry are, who have limited budgets, and they're able to buy the smaller platforms, and that's fine. But essentially, they have a sort of a glass ceiling which they are currently unaware of and can't see, because they're just not able to, apply the level of resources which will enable them to develop their own software products. They've got to kind of do limited work.
Well, they can buy in though. I mean, that's the idea of this precision hawk and drone deploy sort of things. They can buy the bits they need, allegedly. As you say, it's hard. Things hard to do with the human eye for inspection. My brother restores heritage buildings in the UK, and he can't stand unmanned aircraft at the moment. And he uses the analogy: as soon as it's better than a man in a bucket, because they swing a man under a crane and a bucket to look at all the folds and cracks of historic buildings. He says as soon as he can beat that, I'm interested. And I have a feeling we're getting to that point, that algorithms will crack detect and all sorts of other things for him, and unmanned aircraft will swarm across buildings and get the job done. I can also see many more of the systems coming out that are just a drone in a box that someone somewhere presses a button and it goes and does the flight by itself, comes back to the box and puts itself to bed until next week when it needs to do it again. I can see that becoming a big thing soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I last year I did it was an insurance-related inspection using an Ascending Technologies Falcon 8 on a fire-damaged stately home in Surrey, which where the floors had all collapsed into the building, and essentially it was unsafe for a human to go into it. So rather than have to put a cherry picker down through the top, we flew the aircraft. Actually, the pilot was in the cherry picker and situated above the building, but we were dropping the Falcon 8 down into each of the rooms, and then doing a sort of a 360 stitched ortho mosaic and panorama, which was then blended into a LiDAR model, which when it all came together, it was all produced in a software package which enabled the insurance adjuster to go into that software package and then take a really close look up at individual things like individual bricks in a wall in a particular building, and to determine the level of damage. And now that was done with one aircraft, so it was quite a complex process. It was quite technical, quite finicky. But I think we're only a couple of years away from very sophisticated swarm technology, in the same way that you've seen in that follow-on film to in the Alien series. I'm trying to remember the name of it now, where they go off some alien planet, and then when they go and visit this big mound of Earth, the guy gets a little glowing orb, which is a drone, throws it up in the air, and this thing just goes off on its own without any instruction, completely maps the inside of an entire mountain of tunnels in the space of about 3 or 4 minutes, and then is back, produces the internal model to the human being, so they can see exactly what they're presented with. And that level of technology really is only not far away. It's months, if not a short number of years away.
Well, that fed very nicely. Unfortunately, Jesse Perkins was going to join us, and he's of the Tiny Whoop fame, which is it's a very small quadcopter with a that they're using for FPV racing, and it's very, very cool. And I was going to I've forgotten the name. You'll probably remember, Craig, the Swedish company that's converted the tiny little RC helicopters into super expensive military machines now. Is it Praxis or something like that? And I can see these tiny whoops and things like that being very much part of the future of commercial unmanned aircraft flying. I can see a box of them being sent off to exactly as you described that all did, just disappearing off by themselves and inspecting buildings and coming back with the data. It's not very far away. It really isn't. And I was talking to somebody last night and was talking about I was amazed when I had the first go of a Phantom 3. What I did was I didn't read the manual because that's not what Joe Public does, and I used drone deploy. Well, first off, I got my 13-year-old lad to fly. He had a go, so I could see it flew, so that was all right. So I didn't quite do it straight out of the box. But then the next thing I did was I just put a flight plan into drone deploy. I hit the go button. It flew the mission. It took georeference pictures. It came home in time for tea and medals and all was done. And I was gobsmacked. To me, it was like magic, really. I know it's what it's supposed to do. I know it's what it's designed to do. But if you've made your own systems over the years and you've tried to integrate a camera and just integrate a camera and get geotagged images from a mission that you've flown, it's really quite hard. So it was amazing you could do it out of the box. So the apprenticeship that Bruce is an excellent constructor of things, but that sort of apprenticeship of learning and crashing and doing and all that's the sort of apprenticeship somebody's only had to be able to do for about the last 10 years. It's gone now. You don't need to be able to do that. If you were a blacksmith, apart from having the television on in the background and maybe some central heating, that hasn't changed in 500 or 600 years if you do a blacksmith's apprenticeship. So our industry is moving so quickly. I've ranted on, haven't I? It's very hard to know where we're going to be in 5 years' time.
I think the future of the industry as such is going to change dramatically. Now, I'd liken it to the PC industry, the computer industry. If you look at the largest companies in the world right now, they don't sell computers. And they sell services and they sell software, Microsoft, Google, and the like. And it's going to be the same in the drone industry. The drones are just a piece of hardware. The real money is going to be made by the companies that develop the software that allows us to use these tools in a better, more intelligent, more efficient manner. So if I was going to get into this industry with a view to making a lot of money, I'd be looking at setting up a service company or creating software to deliver the solutions to the customers through the companies that are flying drones.
I agree. I think very short-sighted if you think being a drone pilot's going to make you a fortune. It's very, very short-sighted.
Yeah, but I think that is perhaps the misconception within the industry, certainly in the UK. There certainly has been in the last 3 or 4 years a gold rush mentality, and unfortunately, if you follow that analogy all the way through, quite a lot of the prospectors in the gold rushes of the mid 1840s, 1850s never made a fortune from it. They were caught up in the wave of, yeah, let's get along there and see if we can make our fortune. But there is an analogy I quite like to state often, which is that in a gold rush, the people who make the money are not the prospectors. It's the people who provides the shovels and the wagons.
That's right.
Because they are they're essentially providing services for a massive growing requirement. And that, of course, isn't very comforting for those people who are operators, for those people that have got into the industry because they think, well, this is where I can make my fortune. But I think, I've already seen in the UK, and it's difficult for me to say if this is happening elsewhere, but I've got a very intimate understanding of the UK unmanned aircraft sector, and I can see consolidation happening in the UK. Businesses are failing, smaller businesses, because they haven't got a very solid business case. There are companies that are now starting to consolidate together because they just can't continue to operate on their own. And people are moving about. So, you know, highly capable, high quality people are choosing to move on from a particular company to a better situation to see if they can sort of improve their chances of success in the future. And that, I suspect, is a model that will probably be happening elsewhere in most of the advanced countries using unmanned aircraft. Because, you know, essentially there are so many people coming into the industry, it can't sustain itself at its current rates. There's got to be a level of natural selection, I think we can probably term it, a thinning of the herd, if you like, and that's only natural in a new sector.
Here's Jonathan. They've changed clocks in America, haven't they? And he's joined us at the wrong hour.
Yeah, right.
GMT, Jonathan. GMT, not GNT. GMT.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sat in the dark. We've had a power cut here in South Africa, and so I've got all my solar gear out. But good. And we're joined by Bruce, who's in New Zealand, and Craig in the UK, and we've just spoken all about why we're right and everyone else is wrong.
We have like how many different versions of the English accent going on here or something?
Yeah, you guys all talk funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And
okay.
And Craig's somewhat worse. He's on the Welsh border.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no accounting for taste on that. So, well, Jonathan, as you're joining us, and I can't put anything up, so not prepared. Have you got anything you wanted to talk about quickly before we disappear off?
Oh,
please don't talk about.
Say again.
Please don't talk about the election.
Oh no, I won't. Did you guys talk about the Phoney Droney attorney consultant situation?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
We didn't.
Yeah, that's actually what I was doing right before this. I had a phone call, and I would highly suggest everybody in the drone industry do their proper due diligence in investigating anybody they're actually working with, particularly anybody who claims to be an attorney or acting like one. That's all I have to say.
Well, all right. Well, then, how many people do you know of like that over there, and what could go wrong if I use that sort of a term?
Oh, big. Okay, I'll give you a great example here. So let's say Gary goes and hires some shady consultant that does everything under the sun in the drone sector. Well, one, you don't know if you have an actual honest guy that you're dealing with, because in the States they have the bars which have certain standards that you have to meet in order to actually apply and be a member of them. Normally a background check, stuff like that. So when you're dealing with just a general consultant, there's kind of like this unknown, you don't know how legit he is. He could be shady. So there's no gatekeeping function on the front end. Then on the back end, there's no like ethical rules making sure that he is actually maintaining the information confidential, and as well as the information that you share with that individual is not privileged communication. So it can come in problematic if there is any type of lawsuit or enforcement action investigation against you. And there are some individuals that have started doing stuff in this area, and I don't think people really realize like the significance of that is that if the attorney on the other side catches wind that whoever you're dealing with is not an attorney, they could subpoena that individual to testify against you.
Oh, because they know all the stuff. You've told them all this stuff.
And there's no attorney-client privilege to hide behind. Because I could say, I'm an attorney. That's my client. That's the end of it. And there's rules in the evidence that in the evidentiary rules that prohibit the admission of that evidence. However, there is no rule anywhere that goes towards the consultant-client privilege. There is nothing like that. There's clergy privilege, doctor privilege, attorney-client privilege. Some places have accountant privilege, like Florida, for instance. But yeah, you don't have that situation with just general consultants. And so that's just one big issue right there. And then also a second one is, do they have any type of insurance? And what are they being insured for? Because just being a general consultant, like, are there any, like, what do they do? Because some of these guys are just kind of doing everything under the sun to put food on the table. As an attorney providing legal services, I do have malpractice insurance, and that is checked by the insurance company. They're not just going to, and even if they didn't do a great job on the front end, if I try to make a claim, whoever is looking at the claim is going to go, well, are you an attorney? Oh, you aren't? We're going to deny the claim. Because maybe you did some fraud on the front end or something. So there's a lot of issues here. And primarily malpractice insurance does not, I mean, most people think it protects the attorney, but what it really does is it makes the client whole in the event that the attorney gives out incorrect information and harms the client. So it's really there to benefit the client, not the attorney. Well, but it kind of does. So, and that's why attorneys get it. So those are some of the big points that I'd have to make when dealing with this area. So,
Yeah, I'll put the link in. Over in the UK, Craig, I guess there's not too many lawyers involved in all. The Civil Aviation Authority is the only people to speak to, and not a lot of trouble's happened.
No, there's only two. There's only two that I can think of in the UK that are what we call solicitors, lawyers, attorneys, and who have any form of interaction with drones. So they are few and far between.
Peter Lee?
Peter Lee, yeah, and a guy called Simon Fippard who works for Bird and Bird.
Oh yeah, Simon, yeah.
Yeah, so those two guys essentially.
Yeah, those are the only two guys I know too.
Yeah, and there's nobody else in the industry that I can name.
Yeah, I saw something interesting today that perhaps speaks to this sort of thing. I noticed that somebody on a YouTube channel was promoting, it's going to tell us how to get a waiver, and then he's pointing at someone else who's got a website which is telling us how to get a 107. And as far as I can tell, the chap doing the 107 training, perhaps you don't need to have it, that is not an aviation instructor or someone with an aviation background, and the chap telling us how to get a waiver is not a lawyer. So yes, you could say you get a waiver by going to the website, and maybe that's all he'll say, but I have a feeling he won't, and I have a feeling he'll be telling us that he's the man to get them for us, i.e. he'll go online and do it. So I wonder, what am I trying to say? How I could just say go to the FAA website and that would be advice, and that would be it. If I'm making money out of giving people advice, what sort of standard of operation do I have, or how can I be held accountable?
Okay, so you're primarily going to get into, at least in the United States, mostly all the states that I know of are going to have some type of what's called like unlicensed practice of law provision. And the states also have like unlicensed medicine, pharmacy, stuff like that. Certain professions, you have to be licensed to actually practice in that area. So for law, the practice of law, and really I wouldn't just say it's just to that area, but a lot of these other professions that are licensed, the prohibition is written in such a way as to criminalize the activity and be very vague and broad. So primarily getting too close it's a gray area. You don't really know, and it's just all sorts of things can get you in trouble in those particular areas. So primarily what the practice of law is, you want to kind of think of it more or less regarding applying the law to the specific facts of that individual at hand. And that's where it gets kind of difficult to discern And at the end of the day, I don't have to figure out where that actual line is because I'm an attorney. I can go past that line, and I don't really know how to best advise people watching this as to how close you can get to that line without getting burned. But if you're going to start telling people, hey, this regulation starts applying to you, this regulation applies to you, then that's where you're starting to get into a very gray area. And some actually go, just beyond just advice, and they start filing paperwork, going back to what was happening with the 333. And then some individuals, they're actually calling up the FAA and then representing people in enforcement actions and stuff like that. And this seems to be more. I've been hearing of multiple occurrences now, and it's and I don't think they know. What happens is these people are in the industry and their clients get in trouble, and then the clients come to them and then they start, hey, what do I do? And don't worry, I'll take care of this. And so this, there's one individual I told me about it. I warned, I actually notified them. I'm like, hey, this person, I'm like, you better watch out. That's a problem, because if your state bar finds out about that, they can potentially try to turn over that information to the local prosecutors, and then they might want to come after you for the unlicensed practice of law. And then furthermore, if you botch something up, you're going to be held to a standard of an attorney, not a consultant, when you get sued for malpractice. So and do you have insurance for that? So then they come after your house. It's just a bad situation.
You wrote about that on, you've got a guest post on Drone Analyst. Yeah, as I say, I'm sorry, I can't flash up any screens or anything because I'm sat here in the dark and can't see the keyboard. So I just wanted to sort of round up. I noticed something early this evening, and Bruce might have some ideas about this. He's probably been following this as well. Maybe, I don't think these have landed yet in the UK, but I noticed that Best Buy have pulled the Karma from their website. The Mavic's still there, but the Karma's no longer there. Yeah, if you go and have a look now, hopefully it's still the same. But if you look at Best Buy and look for Karma, GoPro Karma, all that comes up is Power Pack and no Karma, but the Mavic's still there. And I don't know. Have you been following the various Karma incidents that are out there, Bruce, and the Karma and Mavic stuff?
Yeah, there's been a few flyaways and issues and problems. But it's just a new product. You expect that. I think the biggest problems they've had is production issues, whether that's caused by lack of capacity or the fact that they've encountered problems they didn't anticipate. I don't know, but I wouldn't put. They'll put it back on the shelf and it'll sell again. The problem is that the market's getting saturated. There's a lot of really good competition coming out of China. I wonder if the day of the expensive consumer drone is almost been and gone.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. Did I see you moving a quad onto your desk earlier? Was that for anything of interest?
Yeah. Oh, no, that's just something I had laying around. I was just going to point out the irony of our regulations here. This is an aircraft according to our regulator. It's a $19 toy, but it's an aircraft and must be treated as an aircraft. And they have these risk-based rules, but they say that this is just as risky as this. This is like a 1 kilowatt of power, and this one is like a plastic toy, but they're all treated the same. There's no distinction made between mass and performance and things like that. And that's why I think the hobby industry or the hobby sector is a little bit upset, because they've been lumped in with the people who fly toys and the people who fly these, what I call balloon drones, which is anything that's GPS stabilized and you can just take out of the box, fly it. That's a balloon drone. The distinction is that these people buy a camera with a drone attached, whereas hobby flyers, traditional RC flyers, they may put a camera on their model. The main reason buys a Phantom or a Karma or something is they want to get cool video and pictures. The main reason people buy something like this, which is a racing drone, is because they want to fly it. And the regulators make no distinction between the two groups. And that's why these regulations difficulty in controlling the idiot people. I call them droners, the people who go and buy this thing off for AliExpress and take it out of the box and fly it without even reading the instructions. I can't believe anyone would do that, Gary, but apparently people do. And people be affected by any changes in regulation because, firstly, there's no education involved. Safety is about education. most people would not knowingly go out and do something that endangered personal property. So if you educate them, they behave responsibly. The other thing is that people who are going to break the rules will break the rules no matter how many rules you've got. So adding extra regulations, toughening the regulations makes no difference to people who, A, don't know about them, and B, hold them in contempt anyway. And those two groups are the problem groups. But they're not the groups that are being targeted really by the regulations. They're going after the law-abiding people who will follow regulations, but they're not the problem.
Do you know what? We've got a lawyer here now. Earlier on, we couldn't decide what made a drone. And now, and I tried to put Craig on the spot, and now I'm going to put you on the spot, Jonathan. In America, at least, what is the definition of an unmanned aircraft?
Well, primarily, okay, so there's aircraft, which is something intended to be flown in the air. It's a device. And then, okay, when you're getting into purposes of like Part 101, I can just pull it up here and just read straight off of it.
Oh, that's cheating. I didn't let the others use Google. That's cheating.
Well, here's the thing. To merely recite law off the top of your head is foolish. That's why we have like books and Google, so we look carefully at things. So Part 101, which is really just Section 336, that was pretty much copied and pasted over. It defines what is at least an unmanned aircraft for purposes of protection. And so that kind of gets problematic. And also Part 107 talks a little bit more about it. I'm pulling it up right here.
What did you mean when you say for purposes of... What did you mean by saying for purposes of protection? What did that mean?
Okay, so 336 was directly related to the United States Congress telling the FAA to not regulate anything that falls into well, there's three definitions here, or three elements for the definition of a model aircraft, and then if you're meeting 5 other requirements, then that is a protected class. And Congress told FAA do not create any rule or regulation governing those model aircraft. Well, FAA ignored that. And that's where Part 48 came from, and then there was the whole the Taylor lawsuit that's still going on, and we're suing the FAA over that. Well, in the creation of these new regulations that came out with 107, they also created Part 101, which is a copy-paste of Section 336. And so in reality, it's like, wait a second here, you created, although being a copy-paste of 336 prohibiting you from regulating model aircraft, you created regulations governing model aircraft. Do you just not see the irony in that? It's like you copied and pasted the provisions that were directed at the FAA, and now you're telling model aircraft guys, you got to be that. Otherwise, you're going to fall out of the 101 category, and you're going to fall into the 107 category, and then they can charge you for violations of Part 107. Namely, you don't have a remote pilot certificate. That's not cool.
Jonathan,
yes.
Jonathan, with the FAA being rather clever when they brought out that registration system, because I noticed they can't pass new regulation to control model aircraft, but what they've done is create what amounts to a civil contract, haven't they? Because when you register, you agree to not fly over 400 feet, not fly within so many miles of an airport, not to do this, not to do that or the other, as part of that registration process. So there's an offer, they offer you registration, there's an acceptance by you, and a consideration, which was the $5 fee, which they refunded, but they still had to make a consideration to form a contract, and an intent. So haven't they replaced regulation with a civil contract?
Okay, so how that whole situation, I mean, you're not having a contract there. You're not going to get like a breach of contract situation for dealing with the FAA. What they're going to get you for is you're going to do something, and then you click the little box at the very bottom that said that you know and intend to follow. So when you did that activity later on that the FAA is coming after you for, you can't argue that it was unintentional because you clicked the box that said it was that you intended to follow it, that you knew about it, and it sets you up for heightened enforcement from the FAA. So they were doing that more or less to start, if you will, stacking the deck in their favor for purposes of future enforcement actions against individuals. That's kind of how that was set up to be used going forward. So if you do violate a regulation, well, you're going to have to figure out, well, are you in Part 101 or are you in Part 107? And some things that you do could potentially knock you out of the Part 101 setup. And one of them, which hasn't been fully clarified yet, would be FPV racing. Okay, so FAA, at least under 107, says that you're going to have a spotter, visual observer guy, flying with you. Or if you're flying by yourself, you could go and obtain a Part 107 waiver and just fly by yourself commercially. Or, well, it's really you don't fall into the model aircraft category. That's the best way to kind of think of 107. It's if it doesn't fit into Part 101, or it's not a public aircraft operation, it's just going to be 107. So non-profit organizations, people flying FPV and stuff, they're all going to probably have to fall into the Part 107 territory. And so once you got to figure out which of those two categories you're in, and then the prosecutor can look through and find out, well, which regulation did you violate, and then you're going to be charged with the violation of that, and that's how they're going to come after you. And you say, I didn't know, and you go, well, they click this little box over here. It's going to be a little fun when they try to actually prove that, since I do know that there has been some tutorials online where there's like a workaround where you can continue the registration process without clicking that box. So I would love to see a prosecutor try to argue that box was clicked. Yeah, it was registered, but did we click that box?
So that's where you do your pro bono work, right?
Say again?
That's where you do your pro bono work, is it?
Oh, well, I'm not doing any more pro bono work. I'm doing the Taylor case with Taylor. We have the 3 cases in the DC circuit. So I've been doing pro bono on those, and everybody in the drone community needs to realize that if you get in trouble, I'm not going to be your attorney doing all your work for free to bail you out of jail. So just neither will any other attorney.
So all right then. So what's an unmanned aircraft or a model aircraft? What's the difference? Come on, you've had plenty of time to Google now.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm like, oh, you're getting pushy now. Getting pushy. Okay, so man, it's like, hold on. I'm trying to pull it up here. Hold on. My computer's acting up. And so, does anybody want to provide some elevator music?
I was going to say, you're going to sing along in the background, but the
hold on, I'm sure.
The FAA's done quite well in some ways, I think, and I certainly can remember some conversations from the UK Civil Aviation Authority when they were going through things, and they realised very quickly that they could they'd be making it. And I remember one conversation said it was ridiculous. We're thinking, oh no, but then we're going to make a 10-year-old boy with a paper aeroplane in the centre of London a criminal if we're not careful. So they did think through the implications of affecting model aircraft operations. And I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, and I think a lot of it's to do with the fact that guys in the offices there do fly model airplanes and they're still involved in it. And if your regulator is very aviation is an aviation nerd, it's going to help. What's your sense of that, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the UKCA have got we have to remember is that the radio control model fraternity have been around a long time, and they're quite influential at regulator level. So they've kind of protected themselves, and that's really only to be expected. But they've established a level of trust with the regulator about what they're able to do, the levels of safety they're able to maintain. So, and I don't see that changing.
I think
really.
in America, I think they did suffer from each organization that went to the aviation rulemaking committees with their own little islands of opinions. And you were mentioning earlier, having good comms with everybody in the food chain. And they didn't. There was little islands of everybody, and they were trying to do their own thing. And they ended up with all the trouble they did for so many years. And it's very nice of them to finally join the commercial world of unmanned aviation. You found the answer now, Jonathan. You're looking like you have.
Oh yeah, sure. So for purposes of, I'm going to go read 336, okay? And it says model, this is directed at the FAA originally. So model aircraft defined. And in this term, the term model aircraft means an unmanned aircraft that is capable of sustained flight in the atmosphere, flown within visual line of sight of a person operating the aircraft. That's kind of why I went back to the FPV discussion before, because the FAA's previous interpretation was that it's not really like a distance requirement, even though it says the word within. They kind of viewed it, at least with their 2014 interpretation, as more like a operational requirement that your eyeballs have to be on the aircraft, or at least be able to see it at all times. So the three requirements: capable of sustained flight in the atmosphere, flown within visual line of sight of the person operating the aircraft, and flown for hobby or recreational purposes. That's the definition for model aircraft. And then if you look over at part 107, you have in 107.3 definitions, small unmanned aircraft is an aircraft weighing less than 55 pounds on takeoff, including everything that is on board or otherwise attached for the aircraft. So that's the aircraft, and then it describes the unmanned aircraft system. So then you're primarily always going to fall into an unmanned aircraft category. If you can, you try to then fall into the model aircraft category, which has less restrictions than 107, namely that you don't need a remote pilot certificate to operate in 101. Altitude requirement is not in part 101. So that's kind of another interesting issue there, even though that the FAA, when they were making people check out to that registration process, we're kind of getting people to agree to things that weren't even in the regulations, but merely FAA's guidance.
That's a 400 foot, isn't it? You're speaking to there.
Right, the 400 specifically. So, I mean, the FAA also responded to that in a letter just recently. And, you know, it's going to be on them to kind of prove that your operation wasn't careless and reckless if you were operating over 400 feet. So, yeah, if you operate over 400 feet, if you may not like it, and if there's people or helicopters around or airplanes around, then they might consider it careless and reckless, whatever that means to whomever you ask.
Did everyone see Casey's video today? Casey Neistat, his latest one.
No.
It's got the Mavic again. He's got his new one. He launches. Look, he's a brilliant guy. He's a brilliant YouTube guy. He's a brilliant filmmaker. But he launches and flies out to the Statue of Liberty and back, and you can actually hear the helicopters on the heli routes there that he's going through. So what I was trying, and look, he's disappeared. What I was trying to say, it's all very well saying the FAA can do this and can do that, but they've in effect done very little to nothing. The Trappy thing was stuff and nonsense in the end. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it just surprises me.
Gary, you've got to wonder if they've got regulations and they don't enforce them, doesn't that just encourage people to say, wow, they're not enforcing them, let's just go and do it ourselves? To be effective, regulations have to be enforced. And if you don't enforce them, then as a regulator, you're derelict in your responsibility. It's all part of the education thing. By not enforcing them, you're teaching people that, hey, you can break the rules and get away with it. So why should we bother following them?
Yeah. I mean, well, do yourself a favor, guys. Just watch the Casey Neistat thing. And this one, it's a great flight, and he's got some fantastic shots of the Statue of Liberty. But for sure, he must have flown through some heli routes because you can hear them, big ones as well. So, yeah, that's not best practice. Not anywhere really. Anyway, look, it's midnight here. I don't know what time it is everywhere else in the rest of the world. We've managed to survive this solar-powered version of this. From this end, thanks very much, guys, for coming on this afternoon and evening and good morning and wherever you are, and hopefully we can do it again soon. Thanks very much for your input, Craig, and
welcome.
Hope to hear more about what's happening there. And hang on, what have you got there? Wow,
fancy
one of my
mug.
viewers sent me this coffee mug. Isn't it cool? I mean, like, yeah, it's a direct.
That's exactly it. That's very cool. That's very cool. I was very impressed that it's that it wended its way to you from wherever it wended and didn't get broken. That's very cool.
Yes, the ugliest coffee mug in the world.
Well, we've obviously set a trend now, so we'll have to try that. Anyway, guys, it's time for bed for me. I will bid you all a good night and hopefully speak to you all again next week. So thanks, guys. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good
Yeah.
night.
Bye.
Right, see you. Bye.